Prince Andrew has settled a civil sexual assault case brought against him in the US by Virginia Giuffre. The settlement involves an undisclosed substantial donation to charities which support victims' rights.
But the figure that's being touted widely this morning in all the newspapers and outlets is about £12 million. Ms Giuffre had, of course, been suing the Duke of York, claiming that he sexually assaulted her on 3 occasions when she was 17, allegations, of course, that he repeatedly denied. So, following the out-of-court settlement, the question this morning is, can Prince Andrew possibly seek a return to life as a working royal?
Well, joining us now is the royal author Nigel Cawthorne. Good morning to you. And we're also joined from Los Angeles by Gloria Allred, the attorney who represented many of Jeffrey Epstein's victims, although not Virginia Giuffre, who is involved in this specific court case, of course. Good morning to you as well. And Gloria, let's start with you because, you know, there's a lot of people talking here in the UK about the fact that this settlement has happened. Why has he chosen to do it? There'll be a lot of questions remaining over that. But this is quite commonplace, is that right, for it to end like this?
Absolutely. Most civil lawsuits end in a settlement, some before trial, and some even before a lawsuit is filed. Not this one, of course, but this one settled very soon before the deposition that Prince Andrew was scheduled to give, where he'd have to raise his hand, tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and answer some very vigorous cross-examination questions posed to him by Virginia's attorney. Of course, she would have had to give her deposition too, and no one, whether it would be Virginia, whether it would be Prince Andrew, whether anybody else, I don't know anyone who would enjoy sitting at a deposition and being cross-examined if they didn't have to. In this case, he's settled. And yes, he paid a substantial settlement to her charity. But here's what it doesn't say, this press statement along with the settlement. It doesn't say whether he also paid her anything personally. And now I'm just going to make a guess. He may very well have also paid her an amount personally, and that is not disclosed. He also doesn't acknowledge that he did anything wrong in terms of what she has accused him of in her allegations in her lawsuit. He says that she has suffered as a victim, but he doesn't say that she suffered because of him, that he did anything wrong. He says that she's a victim of abuse. He doesn't say he was the one who abused her. He doesn't say when it occurred, how it occurred, or anything else about it. So it's very vague. I'm sure that it was heavily negotiated. Every word in this press statement was negotiated. Now there are leaks. We don't know whether the amounts that are leaking, which would be a violation of the settlement to say how much, whether they are accurate or not.
Well, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that they're pretty close to the mark and that we are talking around about between 10 and 12 million pounds, which is around $15 million in the US. And I think it is the scale of the settlement which maybe alters perception here, because we know that Jeffrey Epstein, a convicted paedophile, paid Giuffre several $100,000 to shut up in a settlement with her, which then Andrew tried to use to get the case against him chucked out and failed to do that. But it was, and it's a lot of money, but compared to this settlement, it's peppercorn, isn't it? I mean, just a few $100,000 as opposed to a reported 12 million. What conclusions can we draw about the size? I mean, that is an enormous payment to make. What does it say about guilt and innocence?
Well, you're very right, Richard. It is an enormous amount, whether it's in the UK or the United States or anywhere else in the world. It says that this was a settlement that obviously Prince Andrew wanted. He wanted to put it behind him. This is a significant amount, and he was required to pay this if he wanted to settle this lawsuit. This was a war. Any lawsuit is a war, but especially one against a rich, powerful, famous figure such as Prince Andrew. The only way to end the war and have peace was to pay that substantial settlement.
This is your meat and drink. This is the work that you've been doing for decades. You've represented thousands of cases, similar cases to this. You're involved in Epstein cases, so you know what you're talking about. What is your sense as a lawyer in this field of the tactics, the legal tactics that Prince Andrew Andrew employed. First of all, you had a television denial, which actually did far more harm to him than good. Then you had the sight of him basically scurrying from one palace to the next to avoid being served papers, which, of course, was only delaying the inevitable and wasn't a good look. And now you have this settlement only a few weeks after his legal advisers, quoting him, said that he wanted his day in court. He was determined to clear his name in court. What do you make of his legal teams and his tactics in dealing with these allegations going back 3 years?
Very, very poorly advised, or maybe he got good advice from his attorneys but didn't take it, or maybe he didn't consult attorneys at first. He should never have done that BBC interview. It was a disaster in so many ways that everyone has pointed out. By the way, there was one other thing that he did, Richard, that you didn't mention, which is, as far as we know, he never spoke to the federal prosecutors in New York who said they still wanted to speak to him. He never did it to give information about Jeffrey Epstein, what he observed at all of the residents. That's something else that he avoided. But those were not good tactics on his part, and he's had to pay the price in the court of public opinion. And now in a court of law, he's had to settle this case because, of course, the court of public opinion also affects what goes on in a court of law, not the judge's rulings, but what might happen if the jury pool that is ultimately chosen for the case, if the jurors are selected from that pool, they may have been contaminated by that disastrous interview that he did and everything he did after that.
Right.
Well, let's bring in Nigel Cawthorne here. As Gloria was saying there, he's paid a big price to put it behind him. But there is speculation, of course, about who has paid this. The Daily Telegraph today saying Queen to help pay for £12 million settlement. There are other people suggesting perhaps there could be public money involved. Do we know how this will be paid? It's got to be paid immediately.
Well, we don't know. And the Daily Telegraph is saying that it's coming from the Duchy of Lancaster. The Queen gets the sovereign gets an income from the Duchy of Lancaster, which doesn't belong to the Queen. It's a government property. But that is to provide for the sovereign to do their public duties. Well, I think defending your wayward son in a sleazy sex case in a foreign court is not one of Her Majesty's public duties.
So how do you think it could be funded, then?
Well, he's got some very rich friends who seem to write off his loans for him occasionally. Maybe the Queen's going to sell a few racehorses or a tiara.
He'll need a bit of help to get through, won't he? I mean, there was already reputational damage to Prince Andrew, no doubt, obviously. Where does this leave him? Because there are questions about whether he'll be able to ever return to public life in some form.
Well, I can't imagine that he can ever appear in any public forum without us all becoming Emily Maitlis. We're all going to ask him rather embarrassing questions, aren't we? I suppose he could kind of re-establish his reputation as a war hero by going on the front line in the Ukraine.
You've been covering this story. Were you surprised at the scale of the settlement? Because the sheer size of the reported figure, I keep coming back to this, 12 million reported in most of the papers, respectable papers like the Telegraph. It implies that he was always going to settle. You don't just leap to that kind of figure out of thin air. So what do you make of his statements a few weeks ago, saying he absolutely demanded, and that was the word used, demanded his day in court to clear his name? And this morning we wake up to these headlines.
Well, it was very interesting that when he demanded a jury trial, because Virginia Giuffre, the plaintiff, had already asked for a jury trial, which would have automatically happened. So his demanding, in a rather imperious royal way, was neither here nor there.
Yes, I thought that at the time as well. Can we come back to Gloria? Gloria, you mentioned there in your last answer to us the FBI still wanting to talk to Andrew. Let's set aside the civil aspect of this. Is there still a possibility that there could be some kind of criminal action involving Prince Andrew?
Well, absolutely. But of course, a possibility is not necessarily a probability. And federal prosecutors will always hold their cards very close to their vest, and they're not going to say. The point is this. Even though there's a confidential settlement, it's only of the civil case. And even if Virginia cannot talk about Prince Andrew anymore in public, she can never be prohibited from testifying in a criminal case if a criminal case is brought by the prosecutors. She can never be prohibited from speaking to law enforcement and filing a police report if that's what she wants to do. And then it'll be up to the prosecutors whether to bring charges. Of course, Prince Andrew has denied that he's done anything wrong, criminal or civilly or any other way in reference to Virginia, but it's going to be up to the prosecutors to decide what to do next, if anything. And we'll have to wait and see.
Well, very briefly, Andrew did say some time ago that he would cooperate with the FBI. They report that he hasn't done so, that they can't get hold of him, they can't talk to him. What would you advise him to do if you were his lawyer?
Well, I would never want to be his lawyer because I don't represent people who are accused of, sexual predators, being sexual predators against children, whether or not they did it. But, of course, it was going to be interesting if he gave his deposition. I wondered if he would assert the Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination and say, I can't testify because it might tend to incriminate me, which he could have done. But that wouldn't have been a good look for him either, even though he could have done it. No. I don't think he's going to now speak to the FBI for the reason that he might have also taken the Fifth in a deposition. Gotcha. I don't think he's going to take that risk. OK,
Gloria, that's very clear. Listen, by the way, thank you very much for staying up for us tonight. I know it's very late over there, and you've had a very busy day.
No doubt, I've had lots of interviews.
You've been on the satellite all day in your time for the last 12 hours, so we appreciate you staying up for us. Thank you.
Yeah, Gloria Allred there, and also thanks to Nigel Cawthorne. Thank you very much for coming in to join us.